Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sebastiano Toffaletti at the European Digital SME Alliance. I'm happy to have you with us this afternoon for another episode of Digital SME Live, the weekly events where we bring you the hottest SME topics, digital SME topics that are discussed in Europe. Today we will be speaking about an important topic, which is Europe's twin transition. As many of you may know, the European Commission announced this new strategy for Europe, which is the so-called twin transition, which means that we'll be looking at how Europe becomes a sustainable, so a green economy and a digital economy. So these are the twin transitions that have been announced. And as you know, we have a long-term goal for Europe to become CO2 neutral by 2050. At the same time, we are living in a digital revolution, a digital transformation, and therefore we want Europe to become digital, but at the same time become more green. We will be talking about this topic today with Eva Maydell. Welcome, Eva. Eva is a member of the European Parliament. She's in the Parliament with the EPP, the European People's Party. She's Bulgarian. She's very young, as you can see, and she's very energetic, and she's on top of many digital topics. Eva is also, as you said, she's Bulgarian. As I said, she's also the co-founder of Education Bulgaria 2030, which should tell us that she's very interested in the topic of skills, and I would say digital skills in particular. I know about Eva that she is very much on top of topics like innovation, technology, but also how to support entrepreneurs and innovation. And she is absolutely a leader in the European Parliament, not just because she's young and beautiful, but because she's very knowledgeable about digital. So whatever has to do with the digital single market, about privacy, about digital content, but also about digitizing industry. So again, welcome, Eva, and it's very good to have you here today. Let me start with the first question that we would like to address to our guest today. So you are, Eva, you are a member of the ITRE committee in the European Parliament, and have emerged as a strong advocate for a fair digital policy in the last years. So what are your priorities actually for Europe's digital future?
So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. Very happy that you're joining today's discussion, interview, Q&A, however you want to put it, today's broadcast. I'm glad to be able to converse with you before the Parliament recess and before more and more Europeans hit the road onto their holiday. Why is this important for me? It's important because some of those very key legislative files will kick their work as of September. And hearing more views, opinions, comments, criticism, it's crucial to the work of myself as well as my team. But directly to the answer of your question. Well, so first of all, because I assume we have Europeans tuning in from different countries, the ITRE committee is the So the ITRE committee is the one that deals with the industry, with the research, with the R&D domain, with the innovation domain, and also the energy domain. So in this respect, speaking particularly from an ITRE perspective, my key priorities would focus on a couple of files. And when we speak about technologies and advancing them and giving also our industries and our businesses, our SMEs, the opportunity to grow, I think a key legislative file that has to be followed by SMEs across Europe is the one on the data strategy. It's a very valuable document. It basically, I think, would enable SMEs, would enable e-industry if put forward as legislation, and when put forward as legislation, to help us make better decisions, more informative decisions, and to optimize our processes. We'll be able to create pools for data, where we'll be able to exchange this data, use this data, reuse the data at the same time. So I think this would be one key file where I look forward to engage with European SMEs from every single domain, but also particularly from the tech domain. Another key file which we'll be working on, and for now it's not foreseen to be as legislation, this is artificial intelligence. It's more of a strategic technology. It's also going to be probably coming out from a parliament perspective as a strategic view, how we see it evolving. And an important point to touch upon is that in the past couple of years and months, when we've been discussing the topic, it seems like across media, but also in different discussions, what comes around is more the ethical aspects of AI. And do not get me wrong, they are very important. However, there are so many other aspects of AI of which we talk way too little. And one of them is related to the immense work and the immense way it would be very beneficial and supportive for researchers. The importance that AI could have for all our industries, aviation, every single industry we could think about. So I think it would be very important for us to focus on not just one aspect of AI. And this is why within the industry committee, we would like to emphasize on this other area where AI could help our societies and could help our economies and could make industries basically more competitive. And finally, I think what's important also seen for the past couple of months, and it's a topic that I regret in a way bringing it up, but it seems like it's something that we never properly solved, and that's the digital divide. And I want to continue working on bridging that digital divide that we see, not just between member states in Europe, but also different regions in certain member states, and particularly in between different parts of Europe compared to other parts of Europe. Because we should not forget that after all, if a company believes to have found their place where they would have their headquarters or their production facilities, to be on the good side of the digital divide, let's put it this way, this same company operates within the single market most probably and operates with other member states. So there's a lot of work to make the difference between the most successful businesses that deploy these digital technologies, not just for Zoom meetings or GoToWebinar meetings, but most importantly, they improve their whole way and their of doing business and their whole operations, operational models, their value change, their customer relationship. They reinvent themselves thanks to technologies that could enable this to happen.
All right. Thank you, Eva. And before we continue, let me remind everyone that we are live. We are broadcasting Eva Maydell, member of the European Parliament, live on the social media channels on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and that our audience can ask questions directly to Eva by using the comment functions in the different social media platforms. You mentioned the data strategy, artificial intelligence, and digital divide, digital infrastructure, Eva, as your key priorities. And I can only agree that also for SMEs, in our view, these are very important files, and I really hope that you can move forward with these priorities. But going to the next question, perhaps. One of your priorities that you haven't mentioned here yet is education and how to enhance quality education. And we know that you are also a co-founder of Education Bulgaria 2030, which aims at providing a better, more relevant education provision to young people. Digital skills play a fundamental role in developing a sustainable digital economy. So what kind of skills do you think are needed in order to enhance a sustainable economy in your country, Bulgaria, but also in Europe more in general? And what can we do to achieve, to develop those skills?
Yeah. So first of all, I need to say that about 5-6 years ago, it was not very prominent to talk within Brussels bubble, being called European-wide forums, to talk about education and talk about skills. I remember that often when I would bring it into discussion, I would be cited by saying, "Oh, that's a competence by the member states. Like, why are we even discussing it?" Especially by members that have been in the parliament for 20 years or so. And they think the parliament's more about this geopolitical role, and we should not meddle into some small little topics like skills. But this has changed tremendously over the past couple of years, and I think there's a number of reasons. One of the reasons is because we have understood how interconnected our labor markets are. We have understood how the war for talent across the globe, not just in Europe, is getting more and more fierce. We have understood that talent attracts talent. We have understood that places of excellence just do not emerge by themselves. They need to be fostered, they need certain ecosystems, and so on and so forth. So I pinpointed that education is one of my key priorities as a member overall, irrespective of which committee I work on or not, because I truly believe that we cannot be competitive as a continent if we do not have prepared professionals. And we see that in many member states, education is, let's say, the level of innovative education. And, we're not speaking about some groundbreaking innovation in education. We are simply talking about education moving from the old, stigma of just gaining knowledge without practice, or simply being able to memorize things without actually being able to develop skills, and most importantly, develop on those key skills that are essential for the 21st and 22nd century. It's becoming a problem for member states across Europe. So if Europe wants to continue to be competitive, it has to invest in its people, and particularly on skills. And one could elaborate that way further, but briefly, personally for me, skills that I think are very important to bring up individuals that are better prepared for the world are learnability, the ability to continuously advance on your knowledge and on your skills and on yourself. Adaptability. We are living in challenging times and sometimes unpredictable times. So adaptability would also be absolutely key. Curiosity and analytical and critical thinking skills are absolutely important. But on top of that, if we really want to play a key role in some of the most destructive industries, we need the STEAM and the STEM skills. And this is what we've been working with, the project that I supported from the very beginning, to which you referred, Education Bulgaria 2030. We started it 5 years ago with a horizon of 50 years ahead to get the skills of youngsters better. But also we are lately working a lot on improving the skills of teachers, of headmasters in schools and directors, because we have seen that in order to have this new type of educational model, you need to make sure that the traditional model of education is also a little bit disrupted in a positive way. So we've been investing a lot of our time in training teachers and an academy for directors and so on and so forth. And I have to say the support of the business has been instrumental, because we do this for trainings to train the modern director of a school together with the CEOs of companies and together with the business itself. Has proven to do miracles for these classes and the schools and these teachers. But of course, it's a small scale. We don't have the capacity to train everyone or to change all educational models. But it's a step in the right direction. And thank you for giving me actually the opportunity to refer to that project that I started. It's my other hat, not so much as an MEP, but in my free time.
Right. I think
free
your
time sounded
message
like
is,
a luxury, but
yeah.
yeah.
I think your message is very welcome here, because definitely I totally agree with you that digital skills has to be a priority, because we are in a what's called talent economy, and if we do not attract the talent, and if we do not think about building that talent for the future, I don't think we have a future actually as an economic space. But digging a bit more on this topic, how do you think your country, Bulgaria, is doing in that respect? And do you see maybe other countries in Europe which should be looked as a role model in terms of skills? Because I think it's never enough to speak about this topic, because there are so many, as you said, there are so many older members of the parliament in Brussels, but also in the different countries, which maybe don't see this the same way. So the more we can talk about it, the more we can show the good examples, the more I think we are advocating for a good cause.
Yeah, well, so I've been very proud with the Ministry of Education in my country, because it has put forward key legislative efforts, or different sorts of documents that are being executed by the educational system and by schools, especially into moving to these key competences that students have to learn, and also giving the opportunity for students to do more practice work, whether as entrepreneurs and learning the entrepreneurial skills, or whether it's related to better technological skills and digital skills. So in this respect, we have a number of examples, and many of those examples are actually paired together with European funding or European programs. So it's not something just be done by a small group of people, but it's something either done cross-border, like the exchange of teachers' skills and knowledge. We are in a project about Erasmus for Teachers that brings together 7 or 8 different countries, not just from the region, but from whole of Europe. And I think this sort of projects have to be multiplied, because this is exactly when it is the teachers themselves, the schools themselves, people from the ministry learning some best examples and being able to implement them. So I've been happy that with more of this sort of programs, and I hope we'll get them in the next 7 years of the European budget.
Wow, it's very good to hear somebody who is not just a legislator, but is also engaged in the practice, in the implementation of the things that are decided by the policymakers. It's good that you refer to Erasmus Plus as a concrete funding scheme, and then you have to go on the ground and do it, right? Because otherwise it all remains in the air. That's very good. Let me move to the next question, because you are also on behalf of the EPP in the European Parliament, the rapporteur for the European data strategy. You mentioned the importance of data earlier, and you have been emphasizing in these months the need for what's called data spaces. So places where especially SMEs can access to data, and this will be a requirement for better innovation in Europe. So we believe that access of data is an important piece in a bigger picture of how the digital sector can also contribute enormously to European sustainability, environmental sustainability. Openness, interoperability, and access to data are what we call the trinity of innovation. So, for instance, we think that if innovative SMEs and startups had the chance to access data, access the data sets that are behind products, not just ICT products, but products in general. Think about cars or even lifts in the buildings, products that may use data. We think these SMEs will be able to improve these products, to innovate on top of them, and to repair and perhaps recycle these products, so in a way to make those products better and make their life cycle longer. So think about the circular economy and the green objectives of Europe. So what do you think in terms of European policymakers like yourself and the decision makers in the European Commission and the member states can do to support this goal of the twin transitions, so to say?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and thank you so much for elaborating a little bit on concrete examples, because I think it's important to actually say what should be done, and in a brief terms. Well, I like to say something that probably doesn't make me very popular among my colleagues. But I've said it for many years now, and it's kind of like, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I still think that we need that. I really think we need more digital leaders. What I mean is that we don't have to have prime ministers that code. Could be nice if it would serve them any purpose, but they could have plenty of people to code for them. What I mean by digital leaders is people that actually do not just live with the trends from yesterday, but live with the trends of 10 years ahead of us. And it's very difficult to predict what happens in 10 years, but we would be able to in any way grasp the tendencies ahead of us. So people that are digital leaders in policy maker shoes, executive positions in institutions, need to be open to new technologies. They need to be able to grasp these new trends in order to create the best possible framework. What happens very often is we are more onto the defensive of doing things. We more look what has happened with technologies in the past 5 years, how they have emerged in the past 5 or 10 years, what's happening today. And I don't mean to undermine that sometimes tough legislation is necessarily, or tough guidelines in order to have more clear rules. But what we are speaking here today is not about platforms. What we're speaking here today is how to create the next generation of leading European companies. Because it's no secret for anyone, we're strong in the SMEs, we are strong in the industry, we are strong in doing things. We were initially not strong on the internet, so to say, on that part, but we could now have the opportunity to pair this together with Europe's strengths. But in order to do that, of course, the impetus of companies is the first thing to come ahead. But if we provide them with the best possible environment, this is where the job of policymakers comes. And if those policymakers can grasp those new trends of tomorrow and of 5 years ahead, they would more likely produce legislation that would enable innovation and legislation that would enable these companies to grow. Because we need to know that European legislation, after all, is here to basically stay. And we have to be consistent on one hand, but we also need to be coherent. When we speak about data, for example, because after all, it is the fuel for the digital economy. But the good thing is that unlike fuel, it could be reused by many people. It could be put on hold and then used again. Many different sets could be done. Because when we speak about data, that does not mean not to have any regard on privacy, for example, or data protection or trade secrets. It means that we need to clarify those conditions and purposes. Why and how can data be shared? How it can be used in order to give the confidence to companies to do that, because otherwise they will not do it if they're not confident enough. It makes more sense. It could also end up in bringing more common goods to solving societal issues. We have more and more of these societal issues. And I think if we put forward even institutional data that could be used by companies, they could come with solutions that policymakers sometimes cannot come themselves. So there's a big shout out at leaders embracing technologies. And again, I spoke about data and privacy. One could speak about jobs. It's all about what is all necessary is to have a plan, to have a strategic vision, and to see where technologies could play a key role to actually help societies and help Europe to be what's very popular to say nowadays, globally competitive. And technologies could help us being globally competitive. Technologies emerging 20 or 30 years ago cannot help us be globally competitive. So if we want to be those leaders to set the trends, well, clearly we need to embrace what's out there right now, of course, with clear, again, purpose and with clear clarifications of how this use has to happen.
Let me here ask you a specific question then. What do you think about digital sovereignty, this concept that has been brought very much by this new commission? Because you are a great advocate for the adoption of technologies, okay? But do we want Europe to be, to be an adopter of technologies developed elsewhere? Or do we want Europe to be a developer of these technologies? Do you think the Commission is right to put the accent on this content of digital and technological sovereignty, or are we risking to isolate ourselves?
Yeah, well, it's a difficult question in a way. I don't think it's necessarily clear cut. I think it's a very important point for the Commission to emphasize and for countries to emphasize, because when we speak about being globally competitive, it also comes with us bringing back some of our sovereignty within Europe and within our companies and within our member states. But in the same time, if we're overly protective and if we are, unnecessarily sometimes harsh on bigger companies, while in the same time we affect smaller European SMEs, then we don't understand the damage we are doing. Because first and foremost, we also need to think about our own companies. And sometimes there's legislation that goes across the board that affects everyone and affects smaller SMEs and startups in Europe. And it is a problem for them. And, I'm sure some of the people on this discussion today would say that some of the latest European legislation has not been very favorable for their companies, and it has been tough and it costed a lot. So we need to keep that in mind as well. I kind of feel that we are more often led by the main headlines in newspapers rather than we trying to create those headlines by sensitive politics and by trying to have European companies leave. European companies will not leave if we continue to have the type of legislation that's divisive or the type of legislation that does not enable our SMEs to thrive. So it's a very big question. I mean, it sounds good to say we want to have our European sovereignty. I want that too. And I would like to advocate for that. But it's not as easy as it sounds. And I would like us to get it back by being a more prominent global leader and having a tougher say on the table of G7, for example, and leading the discussions on, technological transformation. But that comes with enabling your companies. It comes with, leading the discussion on climate, which we are, I believe, and setting the rules for the rest. But as you rightly said, these transitions go hand in hand, because we should not forget that we can never, ever, in my opinion, achieve the green goals, which are very ambitious, while in the same time we continue to be thriving economies and to continue living a similar life as we currently are, without having technological developments that would enable us to cut those CO2 emissions or to make our companies more energy efficient and so on and so forth.
Yeah, Perhaps just to comment on what you said, because I think it's interesting to have this conversation with you, as you are a legislator, because the digital sovereignty is indeed, could be a controversial topic, as you mentioned. What we hear very strongly from our digital SME members is that under no circumstances we should think that our companies, our SMEs and startups have the same model as the US. Okay, we should not try to imitate the US, because we are substantially different. For instance, we are much stronger than them we are not very strong in the B2C, in the business to consumer sector, the big platforms. I mean, this is clearly gone to the US, but we are much stronger in the B2B services, to business, digitization, the software made to measure for specific companies. So I think we could have a model ourselves. But on this particular question, maybe I can also ask you a question that comes from our audience, which is, I'm reading now, do you think that the current proposed budgets for digital are adequate to promote European digital skills and to create digital leaders and make Europe a digital sovereign economy? Because you probably heard that President Michel has put on the table a proposal which is cutting a little bit the budget for the next 5 years in terms of innovation and digital. Of course, he probably has other priorities. We all understand that. But do you have a vision on that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, on what you were saying, that the stances of the digital SMEs, how we should not imitate what's happening in the US or somewhere else. We need to develop our own, which we are, but we just need to give a little bit a better push. You should say that more often, more louder, and even clearer if necessary. Why I say this is because for the past 5-6 years, maybe even longer, all my colleagues have a line that they use in every interview or every speech they give, and they say, we want the European Google and the European Facebook. Now they said now they don't quote anymore Facebook, it's more about the Google.
Please, no.
and lately I've heard the expression, we want the European Netflix. So wow. When I hear that, I get a rush, because this is not what I think we need to be asking in Europe, because these companies already exist and they're grand. We should be, looking into our own strengths, as I said earlier. So please amplify this message. This is not what Europe needs. If anything, when Netflix came to Europe, we changed the rules under which Netflix operates. And now when Europeans go on holiday or work in a different member states or on a trip, they could use the same Netflix subscription, right? Did we amend that? Did Netflix obey? It did. In the same time, did Netflix also agree to put more European movies and series in its offerings? It did. Well, we did that. But now we need to make sure that European companies in the cultural and technological domain could come up with something else which is not related to the same platform, which has proven to be successful and fair enough. So please amplify this message. The second point on the concrete question, yes, I am aware for this new proposal that's being put forward. From what I understand from the proposal is that it basically says, we are currently discussing on the table two things. One is the long-term budget and the other is the recovery plan. So we suggest that in the long-term budget, we will not have so much money allocated to Horizon and other programs also related to skills, but we will take this money from the recovery fund. Probably because Charles Michel would like to make the budget a bit lower because we have some frugal member states that don't want to spend so much on the budget. I would assume so. However, it also raises the question, where do our where is our main aims? So on one hand, the recovery fund and the budget operate in different terms, right? So if you move some of the funding from the recovery fund, it could probably be used in a different way and not the same way as it was initially thought about. So we need to be very careful, so to say, when we look at this, how is it going to be used? My first reaction would be it's not good news that exactly this is trying to be cut. My second, more positive outlook is that there still will be some resources, but in the end of the day, it's up to member states. It's going to be up to national parliaments. It's going to be up to national governments, to national and regional politicians to come up with the right plans. And this is where I think your sort of organization and your members come into the game, so to say, because they need to put pressure on these institutions to make sure that they are good plans for investment, that these are not the plans we had 5 years ago, these are the plans that are 5 years ahead looking, because it's easy to create plans that we already know and that we worked on them. What is more difficult is to have plans that we've never executed and they're more nouveau and we need to do something that we've never done before. And this is where the innovative and tech sphere comes in and tries to disrupt and tries to put those plans to be as ambitious as possible.
Absolutely. Look, you mentioned these recovery strategies. So maybe we can speak about the COVID-19 crisis. So in your eyes, does this represent also an opportunity to rethink the economy and develop a new sustainable economic model for Europe, a very innovative, digital, climate neutral, sovereign, and resilient and inclusive economy could take place? And if so, how can you as a policymaker and we as an association perhaps advocate in Europe to set the course for this fundamental shift? What is your take on that?
Well, a couple of things. I would start again on a positive note. So what happened in the past couple of months, I think, has brought a little bit more awareness to the broader public, to the broader society, to more citizens, why technologies and why tech solutions could be important. Again, we don't speak about the Zoom account that people have felt comfortable using. It's a good step because it didn't happen before that. What we speak about is, big data, 3D printing, AI solutions, cloud, etc., etc., etc. The reason why I mentioned those is because they came very handy for authorities. They came handy for citizens. They came handy for businesses that was those businesses that were easily able to adapt them. So I think there is this sort of awareness. I would like to see even more awareness being put forward by media or by businesses themselves or authorities, how technologies have facilitated their work, how technologies improve their work. Because in this respect, we could have now a positive narrative for European SMEs that are in the tech domain. We could have a positive narrative of why we need to deploy these technologies that currently seem not to be the reason. And it seems it's not necessarily the priority of member states if they want to cut it out from the budget, because the budget's for 7 years. The recovery fund is not for 7 years. That's something I forgot to mention earlier. It's not bad if we make all the important tech investments in 2 years. No problem. That would be great. But will we do it? So in this respect, I think we need to build on this positive momentum and make it even bigger than it currently is, in order for us to not spend headlines and time only on the fear mongering of technologies. If now we don't use the momentum of making sure that there's certain good points in disruptive innovation, we might not get a new opportunity soon. Or maybe the new opportunity comes with a new wave of COVID-19, which is predicted by epidemiologists that it will happen. But we need to use the opportunity. Then, in the other hand, I think policymakers, but also citizens, need to know that we're speaking about the technological revolution. There will be a new one. And the reason why I say that is the factory of the future will be digital. It will be about the softwares that will be driving the processes. So I do believe we could still win on the B2B, and data, cloud, and AI have their advantages. But we need to have, various approaches. One related to industry, others related to our societies, also related to our institutions. Our institutions could be more modern. Our institutions could be more open, could share more, and in this way bring more opportunities for businesses and then customers, citizens, or B2B exercises.
Right. It's absolutely interesting what you're saying, and we do see what we heard from our members, because you mentioned the faster digitalization that we are seeing in these days. Indeed, many people are using Zoom, and indeed, unfortunately, they think this is enough, no, to become digital. Whereas for us, the digitalization is really a long-term journey, which is about investing in innovation projects, which is about rethinking a company's business model to create value out of new technologies, such as you said, big data, AI, and so on. And unfortunately, I must say, the crisis, although on one hand has opened the door to use new technologies, on the other hand, it has slowed down the investment by companies in innovation projects, in long-term innovation projects that are perhaps disruptive, but they need investment and they need people to have a long-term vision. So maybe this is something that the funds could help sort of support better the companies in the longer term. Let me go towards maybe the last question, because then we understand you are busy later with another meeting. Perhaps when we think about this sustainable digital transformation, longer term, when we have SMEs really going through a substantial and sustainable development, how do you think the policymakers can make this happen, can support a longer term transformation of the SMEs?
3 or 4 suggestions on this point. I think it's a very good question. So first of all, I call it digitalization with vision, and I might have mentioned it earlier.
Good point.
Yeah, I think it's not just about, again, the Zoom account or having a computer in your company, even though I think there's no company at this point in Europe that doesn't have a computer. The question is, for what do you use it? Just to write a document, or you have different softwares and processes going on out there. It's about reinventing the entire business model, reinventing it through the digital goggles, so to speak. We used to have connection. Am I back? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, because you froze and I thought it was my connection, but it seems like we are not cut for the moment. So I think this would be one point. The other one would be, we have many successful SMEs that have made this digital transition, and they're digitally savvy. So let's have more of these talk help the ones. I don't know if now it seems like it still works, but I don't see you, Sebastiano. I would just continue until I get some information.
Yes, I think we can continue like this so that we help a little bit the connection.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great.
Yeah, you can go on. We can go on without the camera, because I think it's going to be better for the bandwidth.
Perfect. Okay. So what I was saying is that we have a lot of those digital savvy SMEs that made the successful transition. So we would like to see more of these helping the ones that need the help. And you know, also organizations such as yours and your members could be very helpful, because some of those that need help are maybe your colleagues across the street in a different organization. So maybe working together and finding where you could support them will be very good for bridging this divide and this gap. I also think that we need more targeted measures in forms of increased EU financial support of programs. We would like to see increased leverage on equity or loan matching funds, for example, commitment to support startup incubators, you know, business innovation centers, different type of science and innovation parks. This could definitely help boost the economy. And lastly, you know, speaking also about the MFF and the recovery fund, financial support for SMEs to take up the latest form of connectivity, including 5G, including fiber, including cloud-based services. It could also include other type of help. It could have certain vouchers to replace equipment, to upgrade skills of the labor force, to have tax incentives for SMEs to digitalize. I don't know, help set up home offices. It's even necessary for MEPs that don't run a business. As you could see from the way my camera is positioned, I'm just kidding. But these are all sorts of things that could help, you know, SMEs. It could be, I mean, I give you a example. We all remember that 6 years ago, the Juncker plan was in the making. It was a big buzzword because it was the first time we were actually working on a big financial instrument plan to be implemented in Europe. And it was initially focused more towards the bigger and larger players, the ones that are happily able to invest 50 million into a new production plan or 150 million euros. But that's not the case for every SME in Europe, clearly. So what we try to do is to have this SME opportunity where certain financing is possible. And then when we saw that, you know, companies would like to invest in, let's say, new technologies, we've understood that their teams lack the skills and they need to train them. So now the plan even offers the opportunity to finance training of employees. So we have seen that, you even it's necessary also to invest in your people when we are speaking about just an instrument. So we had, in a way, by the way, the plan is also seemed to be cut from the MFF and seemed to be moved to the, that's the proposal, at least we'll see what happens, and seem to be moved to the recovery fund, which is again, you know, I don't think is necessarily good news, so to say. These are some of the key, you know, programs that could advance our competitiveness. So we either get it right in 2 years and do miracles with it, or we might become more laggers than successfully implementing projects and ideas. It all depends on, you know, citizens and policy and decision makers and businesses.
All right. Thank you, Eva, for that. With that, we conclude today's episode of Digital SME Live, Europe's twin transitions to a sustainable and digital economy with MEP Eva Maydell. Thank you, Eva. A recording of the live stream will be available on our website, digitalsme.eu, and our social media channels. Thank you to all the viewers who watched the live discussion. We will be back in September with the new Digital SME Live episodes. I'm Sebastiano Toffaletti. Goodbye.